afternoon. I'm Ramón Palencia-Calvo, Senior Director of Chispa Maryland, a program of Maryland LCV. Your presence here today speaks to the power of our community and to your commitment to the environmental causes that affects us all. Our goal with Friday Digest is to provide you with information, tools, and resources to be an informed and active advocate. Our agenda is driven by your interests and needs, so please don't hesitate to contact us with your suggestions. The easiest way to do so is through the survey you will receive at the end of session. As you join us today, please type your name in the chat and tell us where you're from. And please type your questions, any questions you might have, and comments in the Q&A or the chat box. Today, we have three incredible guests who will be discussing different aspects of the CHERISH Act. First up, we'll talk to Naadiya Hutchinson of Baltimore Just Transition Network. Then we will be joined by Jennifer Kunze of Clean Water Action, and then Carlos Sanchez of South Baltimore Community Land Trust will be our final guest. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Naadiya Hutchinson. Naadiya is the co-founder and program director at Baltimore Just Transition Network. She has spent years working at the intersection of environmental justice and public health in roles that keep communities at the center of the work. Her experience, insight, and leadership made her the perfect person to help us set the stage for why environmental justice and cumulative impacts matter so deeply in people's lives. Welcome, Naadiya. And to get us started, we want to ground this conversation in what environmental justice and cumulative impacts really mean, and why Maryland has still some work to do. So when we talk about environmental justice, what does that look like in practice? Not just a concept, a definition, but in the life experiences of people and the communities that you work with every day, Naadiya.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to join this conversation and for this question. When I think of environmental justice in community, I think primarily of what we get to experience. So joy, health. Right now, when we are experiencing a lot of environmental injustice, there's high healthcare costs. There's a lot of healthcare burden. People are going in and out of hospitals, losing their childhood to asthma and to other types of illnesses. But when I think of environmental justice, I think of joy, having the opportunity to live, play, and just like thrive in the places that you love. So yeah, that's kind of what I think of when I think of environmental justice, but also more granularly, like thinking of clean air and clean water. So not needing to have that like anxiety or worry that the air that you're breathing will harm you or that the water that you're drinking has some sort of chemical in it.
Thank you, and thank you for framing it that way. It's really important to remember that all the positive things that are environmental justice. It's an important fight against pollution and other forms of things that harm us, but it's also all the positive things that come with environmental justice in our lives. So I'm building on that a little bit more. Environmental justice is rarely about one thing at a time, right? Communities are often facing multiple challenges all at once. So can you help us break that down and what cumulative impacts that accumulation really means and how does it look like on the ground?
Yeah, so cumulative impacts is one of those like loaded jargony words. And I kind of just want to explain how permitting works right now. So when a facility or an industry wants to come into a neighborhood or renew their permit, so they're already there and they're looking to continue business, right now it's permitted on a facility by facility basis, which means that there is a max of how much they can put into the air, how much pollution they can put into the air. But they're not really looking when and they being the government, does these permits at all of the other facilities in the area. So I like to think of it as like black smoke being the best way to describe it. If you have one smokestack, you'll see the little like cloud coming from the smokestack. If you have multiple smokestacks, you'll have a lot more black clouds in the sky. Right now, they're only looking at one smokestack at a time and not thinking about how all of the smokestacks lead to more and more black smoke in the air. And so when we think about cumulative impacts, we're looking at all of the permits together and having a more holistic approach. And this also then leads to holistic understanding of health. So right now, if you live near a facility that's putting a lot of pollution into the air, that might lead to different types of health impacts like respiratory health issues, like asthma. But if you live next to 10 facilities, you're more likely to have these health issues because you're exposed to so much more pollution in the air. So the idea of cumulative impacts is that holistic approach that recognizes that we're not only experiencing one facility at a time, but that it's our entire neighborhood that's impacted.
Thank you. Thank you for that for framing us the issue. So this is not unique to Maryland, and there's some other states that have already done something about it, and you've been involved in that. Can you share a little bit what the what other states have done specifically? Especially, I believe you have been involved in New York that passed similar legislation. Can you share a little bit in a couple of minutes?
Yeah, of course. So this move to have cumulative impacts is not new or isolated to just Maryland. So New Jersey did it, but also New York did it as well. And the interesting aspect of the way that New York passed their cumulative impacts legislation was it was coalition driven, and it was community driven, community science driven as well. So a big part of the foundation of the cumulative impacts work in New York was having a really strong indicator tool that has kind of been created over the past few years. Maryland already has that. And so we have a lot of the stepping stones and foundational pieces that are needed to enact this law as other states have. And I will also just add that this is a national movement. So when we look on the federal side, there have been for the past few years a really big concerted effort of environmental justice communities from across the United States coming together to try and pass cumulative impacts federally, which is the Environmental Justice for All Act, because we recognize that pollution also moves. And so if we have cumulative impacts in the state of Maryland, that will also impact the surrounding states around us. So I think that New York shows a strong example of what's able to happen when communities come together. And I know that we can do this also in the state of Maryland.
Excellent. Well, Nadia, thank you so much. That was it was incredibly helpful to frame the issue. So thank you for that. So what are we doing here in Maryland? And for that, we're joined by Jennifer Kunze. She is the Maryland Organizing Director at Clean Water Action, and she has been deeply involved in efforts to address cumulative impacts here in Maryland and translate those efforts into the CHERISH Our Communities Act. Welcome, Jennifer.
Yes,
Please
thank you so much, Ramon.
walk us through the bill, please.
Yes, so I'm here to talk about what does the Cherish Our Communities Act actually do to solve all of the problems that Nadia was just talking about. And those problems are very real here in Baltimore. I live in Baltimore City in East Baltimore, and not too far away is the South Baltimore area of Curtis Bay, where Carlos, who's going to speak in a couple of minutes, lives. And that community is one of the most polluted and most overburdened communities in Maryland, where you can see in this picture, you have the neighborhood on the right here. You have a coal export terminal that's a major polluter on the left. You have the W.R. Grace chemical production facility. You have the medical waste incinerator. You have the coal plant. You have tons of fossil fuel storage and distribution facilities, all within this photograph, all within the community of Curtis Bay, and all impacting the community together. And that's what we are here with the Cherish Act to solve with a couple of legal tools. So like Nadia was saying about the New York effort, this has really been community-driven policy. especially with the experience of community leaders in South Baltimore that have spent so much time fighting individual polluting facilities in the area, as well as a network of community leaders from across the state. And we've worked to bring in the best practices from laws that have already passed into law. In New York was one of our premier examples, as Naadiya was talking about, and also in Minnesota and in New Jersey. And New Jersey's legislation is the longest tenured. It passed in 2020, so it's already gone into implementation, it's already gone into effect, and it's already survived a court challenge. So these are really good tools, strong tools that have stood up in court and are working to protect communities in these other states. And so the sort of basic framework for how the CHERISH Act works is it defines first the scope of the bill. So it applies to the most polluted communities in the state, at-risk census tracts that are disproportionately polluted with overburdened industrial pollution based on scientific metrics that are available in MDE's EnviroScreen tool. And it also defines a specific list of permits to pollute based on what communities across Maryland have said are the really critical, the most impactful permits on public health and the biggest gaps that need to be filled in how those permits are administered. And one of those really big gaps that this legislation addresses that is really critical is that to expand public input into this process. Because at present, there are a couple of types of permits with tremendous impact on public health. A large number, a majority of air pollution permits and some refuse disposal permits that actually, when they are getting renewed, there is no requirement for the state to take public input into account. There is not currently any public hearing process or any public comment to inform what the renewal of that permit looks like, and like, this is a facility that exists. What is the community feeling from its impacts? There's no process for right now for the state to be getting that information from the community. So the CHERISH Act really critically adds that process for the permits that are top priorities for the community where there's currently no community input into the process. And then once you have defined the scope and made sure that the the nearby community can have meaningful input, the bill sets up some mechanisms to make sure MDE or the Public Service Commission, as the case may be, gets the data about what's the existing level of pollution burden and health burden in the community and what is or would this facility be adding to it. Then the bill sets up the legal mechanism to make sure that we are not adding more pollution to overburdened communities that make them disproportionately burdened. We can't have that inequity continuing and growing. We need to put a cap on it and we need to reduce that pollution. And then it adds some tools to enforce the pollution limits in those cases where a polluter exceeds what they're supposed to be allowed to pollute, and returns some compensation back to the nearby community when that has happened. So that's the CHERISH Act in a nutshell, and I'll leave it there, Ramon.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a very helpful context and where we are. So you have been working on environmental justice issues in Maryland for quite a while, and you have seen the previous iterations of this bill. I remember when I started in 2014 were the first attempts to start learning and addressing cumulative impacts in Maryland. So for the CHERISH Act, what is different about the CHERISH Act this time, and how does this version improve from previous years?
Yeah, all the kudos in the world go to all of the people, yourself and others, who have been in this since 2014. It's, in some senses, this is year, what would it be, 12 or 13 for this bill? Because the efforts to pass legislation like this go back that far. And in some sense, it's year 2, because the Cherish Our Communities Act was also introduced last year. And we've learned a lot of lessons, both from those 12 or 13 years of work, cumulatively among the environmental justice community, and just in the last 2 years, where we've been able to learn from what's worked in other states, both in the legislative sense and in the practical implementation sense. And we've also learned a lot from working on it in the past year, the lessons learned from the legislative effort in 2025. And really importantly, the coalition has been working both across the state of Maryland and with state agencies to make sure we're crafting exactly the right bill for the state of Maryland. So, for example, at present, everybody knows the state budget is really cramped. We've done a lot of work this year to make sure that the CHERISH Act can go into effect and have all of the meaningful protections for frontline communities that it needs to have, while streamlining sort of the implementation of it so as to not strain the state budget. We've done a lot of work with the community groups and with the state to fine-tune the scope of the bill to make sure that it reflects what it needs to reflect. And so I really think that this is the year to pass the bill. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way that have gone into it.
Excellent, Jennifer. Thank you. Let me ask you one last question. At the center of this bill is permitting. So what does it look like when when a company applies for a permit and now and under the CHERISH Act? What would it be different?
Yeah, so right now, when a company applies for a permit to build a new facility, right now they submit that paperwork detailing what their facility would look like and what the pollution coming from that facility would look like to the state. And the state looks at, okay, well, what is the pollution going to be coming from this facility? Is it above or below a certain amount? And just moves forward with that consideration without thinking about, like, okay, there's so much pollution coming from this facility, but how much is already in the community? And what are the real life impacts of adding that much more pollution when there's already so much pollution on the community? Right now, the state doesn't think about that. Under the CHERISH Act, that would be in overburdened communities. That would be the major thing that the state is looking at and the major determining factor.
Excellent, Jennifer. Thank you so much. I mean, definitely you paint a picture of what's at stake here, what we need this important change in Maryland, and why we need to pass the CHERISH Act this year. So thank you. Now that we have a clear understanding of the policy, how it works, what it changes, and why we need it, let's shift our focus because at the end of the day, this is about real people in real neighborhoods dealing with the real consequences of pollution, right? So our next guest is Carlos Sanchez. He is the youth outreach specialist with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, and he's been out there organizing directly with neighbors around the CHERISH Act, bringing community voices into this fight and making sure that the people that are most affected by pollution and those decisions are also folks that shape this policy. So, Carlos, welcome and thank you for joining us today. So, let me start by asking you, the CHERISH Act is about addressing cumulative impacts, right? So what does that mean for folks in your community? How does it show up in their daily lives in your community?
Yeah, excellent question, Ramon, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. And yeah, it's a good question. Be talking in terms of Curtis Bay, right? What it looks like on the ground is that communities or community members, right, living in their homes, right? Just picture them trying to enjoy time with their family, and across their street they see an open air coal terminal, right? That transports so much coal every year, and yet it's uncovered. And they see what they see in front of their yard or in front of across the street from their homes, on their homes. They see on the inside, on the outside of their homes, on their porches. And to top it off, right, it's not the only one concern there is, right? There's a medical waste incinerator. There's a trash burning incinerator. There is a petroleum management. There is a landfill. There is so many polluting facilities in Curtis Bay, like around 70 to 100 stationary polluting facilities in Curtis Bay that are currently monitored by the Maryland Department of Environment. That doesn't include ones that are not being monitored, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the pay-per-view sense, right? These to my understanding, right, these facilities are all operating within their permitting process as the best of their ability. But when you start to take into account, like I said, one facility on top of the another, all them burdens get piled on, right? And that is what the community have to deal with every single day. And that is something that what CHERISH Act is supposed to address, right? Making sure that those communities, the frontline communities that are the ones being overburdened with pollution, sorry, are the ones that are being protected. And like I said, it's just seeing that there is 70 to 100 stationary facilities all around Curtis Bay alone, and that doesn't include across the other facilities that are across the state of Maryland, affecting other communities.
Well, thank you, Carlos. You definitely illustrated for us the urgency of the importance and urgency of passing this bill. So we're passing the bill, we're moving forward. How could the CHERISH Act change? How will it change conditions on the ground where you live?
Yeah, so that would mean that instead it would change the way the facilities are looked at during permitting application and expansion, renewing, all of that has to do with the permits, right? Instead of looking at it as just one individual permit, they will take into account, it will allow agencies like Maryland Department of Environment to look at it as the group, right? What is going into the community, and knowing what's already going into the community or what's already in the community, make a decision that would deny the permit and not stop more pollution from going into the community in terms of new permits. But that doesn't, with the concern was it in the community, well, what does that have to do with addressing the facilities that are already there, right? The concerns. And that's why Cherish, another way is that it's beneficial and will change the communities in the sense that it will also address renewals, expansion permits to make sure that polluting facilities aren't further harming the community or adding more pollution on top of it.
Thank you, Carlos. And that's a way that's very important. This is not about prohibiting facilities, but it's about making sure that we gradually reduce that pollution. And let me ask you one other thing. There's also some components on this bill to increase public participation. And in practical terms, how would this bill change the way communities participate in these decisions, in the decisions that affect their lives?
Yeah, and Jennifer said it earlier, right, beautifully, and it's making sure that the community's concerns and voices on which facilities are being addressed, are in the decision making, right? There was a lot of extension, a lot of work being done to making sure that we cover all of the community's concerns when it comes to what facilities are polluting their communities, and making sure that keeping the principle of the Cherish Our Communities Act, so keeping the core values of it to make sure it protects and does it what's supposed to do, right? Protect communities, and that making a space for community participation to be, their thoughts, their concerns to be expressed when reviewing a permit or even thinking about renewing or expanding a permit. That those are just things that are not, they're not there at the moment, and Cherish will allow those spaces to be open.
Thank you, Carlos. That is very important. Let me ask you one question. So for folks that are watching us today and want to continue supporting the CHERISH Act, what are other ways that they can get involved and support the passage of this bill?
Yeah, so glad you asked. Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, but the window to submit testimony is today. We're allowing to, in support of Cherish, people can submit their testimony or even reach out to Annapolis or go to Annapolis during the hearings and express, what their thoughts are on Cherish and why it's important to protect communities, across the state of Maryland against, being overburdened and adding more overburden on top of it. And, we have 2 hearings coming up on the 10th of March, which, yeah, like I said, one of the main ways to get involved is submitting testimony, right? And adding that is about going on today. And yeah, Jennifer, I don't know if there's anything I'm missing or you would like to add.
Is there a rally coming up?
Yes, there is. Thank you. I missed that. But yeah, there is a Cherish Act rally, and there is the information on the screen. Thank you for that. And yeah, come out, show up, and let's share the news, right? Like this Cherish Act, it's important that it gets passed to this year, like Jennifer beautifully said, and hope to see everybody there.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I believe we are at time, so I want to thank you for being here with us today. It's been really great to have you. I think that we've been framing the issue why environmental justice is so important and cumulative impacts. What is the policy that we are that is the provisions and what the CHERISH Act does, why it's so timely and important, and also how our communities affected from those environmental injustices. So thank you so much for being here with us today. So that's all the time that we have. As we wrap up, I want to thank Naadiya, Jennifer, and Carlos for being here with us today. Thank you. And to our audience, thank you all for joining and for your support in our work. We will be back next week with another edition of Friday Digest. And in the meantime, please sign up for our emails and follow-ups, and follow us on social media, as we have a big week ahead of us. As Carlos mentioned, we have the hearing in the Senate coming up on Tuesday. Finally, we invite you to fill out our short 5-question survey, which should be in the chat right now. And thank you again. It's been great having you here. And for the rest of you, please continue following us and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.